Thank you.
Well, thank you for the delightful introduction. And yes, we're going to have to tone down a few of those remarks that you made. I'm Sister Corinne. I'm actually a Dominican sister from Adrian, Michigan. But I manage two portfolios. One is the Sisters of Mercy, and one is 14 religious congregations that are very small who wanted to continue doing this kind of investing but don't have the staff anymore. So we created what we call the Religious Communities Investment Fund, and they gave us their assets and now we invest them. And both those funds are invested in you. So I'm a Dominican, but I work for the Mercies, I work for other congregations. I did actually manage my own congregations fund at one time. It's not like they wouldn't let me do it. But I moved on. You know, you have to move on after a while and do some new things. In the course of my life working in economic justice and economic development, I managed a co-op in Kentucky, and that was an extremely formative experience for me. I was right out of business school. And in those days, you know, an MBA was really geared toward corporations. And here I am, 50 families in the hollers of Kentucky trying to sell crafts, and we're having to switch them from a retail to a wholesale venture. So I have a lot of good stories. If anybody wants to join us for wine later, I'll be coming to share those. But the bigger story is religious women, and I'm sure you've heard we've gotten some great press over the past couple of years because the bishops are investigating us. And that's fine. There's a lot of dialogue going on. Please pray for the sisters who are continuing that dialogue because I have a shorter fuse than they do. But it gave us incredible PR. People came out of the woodworks. We feel so supported. So, you know, it's fine. That's, you know, they'll deal with it and we'll keep trying the dialogue. But we are part of an institution that has a lot of history to it. So trying to create change takes a while. And I think we're kind of, we've been through a lot as organizations in terms of change, especially the older sisters. I'm actually still one of the younger ones. But the median age of religious in the United States, not the world, but in the United States, the median age is 76. So when we say you have our retirement money, you definitely have mine because I'm on the lower end of the bell curve. But I think the important story in terms of religious women getting into this was that we had we started to need portfolios for retirement. And we started these 30, 40 years ago. Luckily, many of us had leaders who were wise enough to project and say, wait a minute, all these sisters are going to need care. How are we going to do that? So we started, and then of course we had the dilemma. We have this money, where are you going to put it? And we had people on one spectrum who said, give it away to the poor, and others who said, but we have to care for each other. So it was that tension that was pretty tense for a few years, where we finally developed what we called corporate responsibility. And we're still very active in that today, all the sisters are, in terms of pushing corporations to be good citizens, to do well by their employees, to take care of the earth, all those kind of social justice issues. So there's a lot of dialogues with corporations, meeting with people in corporations, trying to push them to be their better self. In the midst of that, some of the organizations said, you know, this is always push, push, push. Can we do something more positive and creative? And that's when they came up with these portfolios, and in those days it was called alternative investing. And everybody started out small because we started in '78. There was not a loan fund to invest in. There were food banks, there were CDCs, some community development organizations, but they weren't used to taking on debt. We had a couple of daycares our sisters ran. You know, and then we have, of course, when the sisters think, oh, you want to invest in people, my brother-in-law has a business that could use a loan. Or the classic one that I tell in our congregation was that we had a funeral director in town, and he retired, and a young man took it over, and he wanted to expand. So, of course, the older sisters, you have to help Mr. Anderson expand and give him a loan for his new funeral home. So one of our sisters went and talked with him about how do you put a business plan together, etc. And she brought it to the committee, and we sat there and we're like, oh, I don't think we can do this. I mean, what if he can't make a payment? Do we say to Sister so-and-so, you've got to die quick because we need a loan payment? I mean, yeah, we were almost 50% of his business. It's a small town. So we felt there was really a lot of conflict of interest. So with that, we became very clear. We only do nonprofit organizations. We don't do individuals. And over the years, so much has developed in the field. Not only do we have loan funds, and we were doing credit unions back then too. Not only did we have credit unions and now loan funds, and there are nonprofit housing developers, and we've got microfinance. I actually have an allocation matrix for this portfolio. And we look at risk and we monitor it, etc. But going back to the sister story, this was really their money set aside, and they said, but we want to keep doing something that makes us feel better about having these funds, and that's where the alternative investing came from. So consequently, when you got the Sisters of Mercy first loan, a lot of the loan funds really began because Chuck had that orientation. Individuals and then churches were his first audience for these kind of things. And I'm beginning to think that we should start calling funds like you the legacy funds, you know, because between New Hampshire, CEI, what's the other one that I always think of as a legacy fund? Well, anyway, you know, they were started with the help of ICE. I worked at ICE for a while, and the real work was going and talking in church basements to people. I mean, Chuck was on the road all the time talking to people. And actually the concept was not developed by him, it was developed by Bob Swan. And there's a great biography of Bob Swan that I just read, where, you know where the idea came from? There were all these men, he being one of them, who were conscientious objectors during World War II, and they were put in prison. While they were in prison, they started doing correspondence courses. And pretty soon they had professors coming and talking to them, and they kept thinking, we know money is behind war. What could we do to change that economic system so there wouldn't be war? And they were the ones who came up with land trust models and loan fund models, because they said money and land are the two things that help people gain wealth. So how do we impact those systems? So if you ever get a chance, it's a fascinating read, what he went through and things. And then Chuck carried the torch. And you all here are carrying on the legacy, which is wonderful. But back to this, I keep going back to the sisters. When we made the loans, we were very clear that we always work in partnership with people. We're always working in collaboration. So when we started the funds, we always made an effort to make sure we got to know the people, we visited them, and we also were very clear this had to help very poor people, this had to help low-income people. And we weren't expecting to get rich on it, we really wanted it to be mission. And that's where the way we do the lending, I think, is very different than when you get the bank money, you get the government money. And what I'd like to say now to groups like you all is, you know, the median age is 76. So many of us can't walk real well, we need amigos and walkers, can't see real well, have trouble hearing. But when I go and tell the sisters that are retired the story of you, what I realized in doing that was, you're our emissaries, you're our missionaries. When we can no longer walk, talk, hear, be there, you're there. You're the ones that are in those communities. You're the